floor is yours to make a presentation on the work that you've done for us.
Okay, do you hear me well?
You might want to
No
project a
worries.
little more.
Okay, well, first I want to thank all of you. Sincerely, I feel very lucky and blessed to have you all here reunited and to have your guidance and your brilliance shared with me. And I truly feel like my work has been like thoroughly shaped by all your own visions and perspectives on it. And I realized the version of the thesis that you received was previous to the version that contains a page with acknowledgements. So I will rotate that soon, and of course you don't have to read anything beyond that, but I did take the time to reflect and write in there how I feel like each of you has influenced this work and me over this year. So, well, this is entitled Cracks in the Concrete, Urban Multi-Species Justice at Dialogue with the Food Forest. And I just read John's comment that the CA there is a bit awkward, so may drop it if still in time. I think it was the part of me that wants to be aware of where we are and localizing it, especially when I think in the United States, it's usually taken for granted that the work was in the United States.
Right.
So that was a way, but we are all here. This is a bit of the context of why I wanted to do this research in the first place, why I'm interested in the food forest. So we have this context that is, we have increasing pressures from the climate crisis and at the same time the process of urbanization. And then there are all these different responses to how to deal with the challenges that these processes present. Some people going to technology and trying to figure out how to make cities sustainable or livable through increasing the use of technology and solutions of human-centered control. And on the other hand, there are these responses that go back to how nature works and then bringing these other species and intelligences to solve our problems. And then we also have the problem of how to feed this population, and then also different responses ranging between intensification and technology, industrial agriculture, or agroecological approaches that similarly go with how other species and other intelligences of nature can help us solve these problems. And then the food forest as one of the solutions that is centered on this idea of multi-species intelligence, multi-species justice, and that is possibly capable to address food sovereignty at the same time as ecological regeneration, or land reparation is an expression I heard recently. I think that might be even a better way to describe it and relate with it. And I wanted to look at it from an interdisciplinary approach, which this committee reflects, to try and see how sociology can actually engage with this more than human in many ways, and how this more than human in turn will influence and transform the way that sociology thinks about it.
Sorry, I'm gonna advance the slides there. Can people see the slides okay? Okay,
Can we actually jump? Sorry, I was gonna
Oh,
change that
okay. Go on to the
order
next.
and I forgot.
Oh, whoops,
The
question methods. Oh, sure. Okay,
Yeah, so the questions that have been in my mind, both for this research and as a participant at the food forest and trying to decipher and address all the challenges and all the relationships that need to be established for the food forest to actually take place and thrive. So it's a broad question about how these collaborations, how these relationships take shape, both between humans and different social sectors and different organizations, and how that happens also with the more than human as a Is everything okay with the?
No, I'm being my usual incompetent. Just 1 second.
Yeah, no.
So sorry. I'm gonna get that going once more. So sorry about that. Okay. And that should do it. Okay, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, and then how did the collaborations with other species and other non-human or more than human elements of that place and of this project, how do they take shape? How do we learn about it from a position when we don't know, we have been somehow detached and we're rebuilding these connections? And then to enter the field and try to respond to these questions, I united these different methods under the umbrella of an ethnography. So participatory action, me being an active organizer at this project and seeing how my own experience there reflects these different social processes and ecological processes. A multi-species approach that is also taking these other beings into account. Autoethnography, as it is through my participation more than watching others act, and complementary interviews with Tony Barbero, who founded the Food Forest, and an epistemological standpoint that is critical of this idea of objectivity and more aligned with the subjectivity that is a part of research, and the personal perspective as being actually a source of what can be said, what can be called strong objectivity, because it is loyal to exactly how I am perceiving it as a person. And in terms of my positionality, it also influences the way I see everything. I am in all these also contradictory and these different tensions, being a white person on Chumash land, also being a Brazilian person in the United States, and being a foreigner, but also a part of this planet. So I think all of this is well reflected, hopefully, in how I try to depict my insertion in the field. Okay, sorry, now we're going backwards.
Okay, lit review, okay.
Okay, I'll go over it quickly. Yeah, so how I mentioned this critique to dualist modern thought that is attached to this human exceptionalism and human mastery of so-called nature, and then moving towards these interdisciplinary approaches that are criticizing this separation and these binaries, so critical theories of the Anthropocene, critical posthumanism, multi-species frameworks, and inside sociology there is some environmental sociology that I don't know, maybe it should be more clear in there, but also urban sociology from this perspective of trying to overcome the idea of the separation between city and forest and between human and more than human, and the literature on agroecology and food forest that relates to these social aspects of agriculture as well, in the multi-species realm, but also in what we have been studying as socio-ecological justice in the within sociology. That might have been confusing, but anyway. So food forests, I'm sure you're all very familiar with it by now, as I don't stop talking about it, but this this paradigm to produce food that is mimicking and integrating nature rather than trying to dominate the landscape, and then they bringing it to the city, also bringing this disruption of the binaries, and they bring a lot of social and ecological benefits. Apparently food forests sequester carbon more than natural forests, which I think is interesting, might not have been in the thesis. So they have, great ecological influence, and they also create a space that is calm, shady, beautiful, where people can relate to the land, develop a sense of place, of belonging, etc. And so it is, it's at the, what's the word for it?
Intersection?
Yeah, intersection of all these different struggles for land reparation, ecological regeneration, multi-species justice, food justice, community building, maybe others. The Isla Vista Food Forest specifically started in January 2021, and in less than 2 years, we planted over 50 species, natives, non-natives, food, herbs, everything, and trying to heal that land that was once paved by a road. So now we still have all the pieces of asphalt buried in there. Is that a time?
No,
It should be.
that's just the notification.
Okay.
Sorry, I should turn my phone down.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not really tracking the time. And it's within a context of a community that is food insecure, that is densely urbanized, and that has a history of political, social, and environmental movements to respond to these problems. This is where we are. That's where the food forest is. This is how it looked like 2 years ago, and some volunteer work. This is more or less how it looks now, or a few months back. And recapitulating all these beautiful moments where we actually collaborated with the educational institutions around, such as UCSB, and you all, I think, have been to classes with everyone in this committee except for Kevin's. Summer, and with other organizations like the Wilderness Youth Project. That's us. And then this is, I think, one of the key slides to talk about multi-species justice, that is those butterflies, monarch butterflies, coming to visit the food forest very consistently. So it's this idea of the more complex system, that we don't want to only plant human food there. We're also planting all these plants that other species need in order to continue to reproduce and to recover from almost extinction, and how that will eventually benefit all other beings that are in the system, including us. This is also moving forward in this integration of the educational aspect and the ecological aspect and the social aspect. We have measured, taken measures of soil health, and without even numbers, like on the left, we see the soil of the food forest, minus all the worms and ants and like all the living things that are there when we are actually there. And on the right, it's adjacent soil. That's more or less how it looked like 2 years ago.
Wow.
So this, I think, is where results slides start. So the Isla Vista Food Forest can be seen as an intervention, a community-based intervention against food insecurity and climate change. And in that, it's like a local action to respond to a global problem. And it is happening, this rhizomatic phenomenon happening in different parts of the world, and here being one of them. And it's recent, but it's based on ancestral indigenous knowledge. One of the most interesting things from a sociological perspective is the complex governance of the project. I'll talk about it, and that it's addressing multi-species justice. Complex governance, I mean, all these different sectors of society, because I think our institutions don't have any one institution has all the skills and knowledge and power to make a food forest happen. So the food forest itself is kind of requiring and shifting these different organizations to come together to make it happen. So there is an autonomous, and this is the case in many other food forests too, an autonomous collective that has the knowledge necessary, a public institution that has the power over the land and resources, then the community of volunteers, of people that will harvest and benefit, And then if we can go even to educational institutions to explore that potential also of the food forest. And it can continue. We've recently also collaborated with other nonprofits, and the more social ties we establish, the better ecological ties we can create. And I think that's one of the interesting ways in which the social and the ecological are mutually affected. And the more the ecological ties are built, that also changes how the social part happens. And I think from yesterday have a nice example of it. We were having this volunteer day yesterday at the food forest, and one of the volunteers said that she used to pass by and she saw the project, so she wanted to volunteer. And a year ago, more or less, people actually said more things like, I never noticed this place, like I didn't know this was a garden, but now it's good to know. So I think that the ecological building of that as a more visible and robust garden and beautiful with a place to sit and so on, the ecological building of that environment makes people engage with it more. And then the collaborations with other species, very literally, if they are not there, then ecological processes don't happen, such as succession and nutrient cycle and all the things that have to happen for that multi-species community to take place. And then the ways in which that also impacts the human organization around that. So for example, water, especially in California, is a scarce resource, and that generates, like, we need collaborations, we need drip irrigation, but we also want access to a hose. And then if the public institution doesn't want us to have free access to that, then that becomes a conflict and so on. It's classic conflict around water. It also happens in this tiny corner of our project. And with all this being said, then we can see how these hybrids between objects and subjects, how we can see the more than human also take place in the scope of sociology and how we're organizing around it. Some of the achievements and challenges of this project are, well, a challenge is still the limited food production, but an achievement is that it still works as a place for education and culture building and shifting. Another conundrum here I've discussed with Liz specifically about what is the long-term goal. On one side, we want it to be not so dependent on human management, so it doesn't depend on volunteer work and so on, for the food forest to continue. But at the same time, we don't want to think of the food forest as an independent being, in the sense that we will abandon it and not be in relationship with. And we can maybe do the analogy with our human relationship. So we raise a child, human child or a food forest child, and then at some point we want to not be in a relationship of dependence, but still have a relationship of mutual care. So the food forest may not require as much of an intense work as it does now, but it is still something to figure out and to build a community that can give it eventual occasional care in one way or another, according to how it will need us to be serving it. And community building is both an achievement and a challenge. We have been doing some progress in it, but it is also one of the challenges. So finally, I think food forest, this one specifically, and in general, they are showing very explicitly how the ecological and social are intertwined in many ways, and how ecological struggles, biodiversity struggles, are also political struggles. It is a place to reimagine and remake the urban, moving beyond the idea of the separated human from nature. One opening is how to make it more than an enclave in the city, a food forest that is just a little island among many, like, buildings and asphalt and so on. Like, how much can forests take of cities, and to think of eco-cities or green cities or sustainable cities as more than just sustainable and inhabitable for humans, but actually regenerative and a habitat for these different species and forms of being that compose life together. Thank you.
Great, Noah, thank you for that presentation, those beautiful slides, and very articulate presentation of the project. And we're ready to begin with the conversation. Each of us will take a turn with whatever we have to offer in terms of questions or thoughts, comments on the work. And Liz has agreed to start the conversation, so
Okay.
we're turning it over to Liz. And
All right, and I also just want to say, great job, Noah. Liz, I also just want to acknowledge, I know you are under the weather. I hope you're doing okay, hanging in there. Okay.
Doing great, yes. But grateful not to be infecting any of you. Not part of the multi-species entanglement that we're going for here. Thank you so much, Noah, for this presentation and your beautiful slides and your beautiful thesis. I wanted to dig in a little bit more on a couple things that you just mentioned. So I think one of the things that I really appreciate about your thesis is that it calls attention to this convergence of multiple movements with diverse roots, which I think is really a hallmark of food and agriculture politics that you really draw out really well with this case. And I think part of what's exciting about that for us as scholar activists is this potential for a really powerful and broad-based coalition. And also the fact that we're witnessing these emergent political and social formations, which then, of course, bring up a lot of interesting research questions. But then there's also these interesting tensions that emerge from the heterogeneous composition of the contemporary food forest coalition. And you mentioned a few of these, and I wanted to ask you to dig into a couple of them a little bit more, because as I was reading your thesis, these were some of the points that struck me as really insightful for the kind of broader food movement and agroecology movement that is likely contending with these tensions as well. So one of the most thought-provoking tensions for me, which you just mentioned, was the contrast between the objective of achieving a quote-unquote climax food forest independent of human management, which has been expressed by some within this coalition. It seems like it comes from kind of a permaculture strand. And the tension of that with the idea of a food forest as an ongoing web of reciprocal relationships among human and non-human beings, which it seems like is coming from the feminist and indigenous literature and also kind of strands of thinking that you are also engaging with. So I'm curious, how do you see this tension? How do you analyze it? How do you navigate it? Do you see it as a tension? Having experienced this food forest for this period of time and also thought really deeply about it, how do you think about this tension? And yeah, both how to understand it and how to navigate it.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, I think this is a fascinating question. I don't know that I have the final answer of what should happen or what we should do, but I do have thoughts on both sides. I think that, yes, we are trying to build a world that among humans and more than humans is based on more care and reciprocity. And if we are we want the food forest to be a place where we continue to go and harvest food and sit under the trees and have all these benefits. So it does make sense that as we go there, we also give to the place and we continue to see what the place needs from us and attend to that. But on a more concrete and technical level, it would be very challenging to continue to maintain a structure of humans organized to keep caring for the food forest in an intense level as it is now in the long term, especially if it is based on volunteer work. So I think it would be somewhat maybe an analogy between having a child that actually becomes financially independent and goes into life and can like continue, and then we help with whatever we can whenever we can, or having a child with some sort of disability that requires more present and constant attention, which may be the case also considering the urban ecological, if we continue to have less and less water, for example, then it does require us to have like a constant technological solution to solve that problem all the time. But then, yeah, and the political answer, I think that it also depends on how much we can change the structures available. If we have like formal jobs for people to be taking care of it, then yeah, it is easier to provide that care. So I think that, yeah, ideally we'll reach an ecological state that might be called by some as a climax, but we don't need to take it as like the final mark that now we achieved it and we don't care about it anymore. But it is strong and independent enough to be long-lasting, long-standing, to be able to continue to reproduce itself and to grow without intense care, and then we continue to offer this care in the ways that are possible at each time.
Yeah, it's really complex. I've enjoyed our conversations about this over the last few weeks. And I wanted to ask you about one other tension that you just brought up in the context of this question, that you identified in your thesis concerning the role of public agencies. So in the case of Ivy Parks and Rec, or in the case of the Ivy Food Forest, Ivy Parks and Rec, but of course it sort of speaks to the larger idea of the role of public agencies in the food forest movement. So it struck me as I was reading your thesis that in weighing whether to struggle for complete autonomy from Ivy Parks and Rec, or conversely, to advocate for public jobs for urban forest stewards, the Ivy Food Forest community was wrestling with a larger philosophical question about whether to remain a volunteer-led mutual aid project or to try to embed the food forest in public institutions. So I'm curious, also, was this something that you have experienced as a tension? What is your analysis? How do you navigate it? How do you understand this being in conversation with larger debates about this kind of ecological and social repair, large ecological and social repair project that this is part of?
Yeah, David also called attention to that tension, and I think that it is typical for many libertarian or anarchist mutual aid groups to try to be as independent as possible from the state, seeing the state as this locus of domination and defending class interests and so on. And I think that is reasonable in many cases, but personally, I think that the IVRPD is some sort of middle ground between this large, macro, distant, impersonal state and community-based politics and organization that we are going for. And in that sense, I have seen, it goes in all directions. It is true that sometimes they will be limiting what we can do, what we can access, how much we can act, how much land we can take, what we can plant, and so on. And that can be frustrating. But at the same time, I think that the way that the RPD works as an institution is as good of a state as we can hope for, because it is totally community-based and all the participants live in that neighborhood, and the decisions are taken in these board meetings that are open for everyone to join and so on. And that's how the food forest even came to exist, because the public agents were a little bit resistant, but people from the community kept attending meetings until they had to give in, because that's what the community was asking for. And they do offer a lot of technical and operational support with water, with tools, with they have the budgets for acquiring plants, and they will go and acquire plants for the project according to what we are demanding, according to our specific requests. So I think that it is a fair case for reconsidering what the state can look like in this collaboration with a community-based autonomous project. Thanks for the question. Yeah,
Yeah, fascinating.
and I think that it is very interesting indeed.
Good answer. I really like your point about, yeah, the IV. What is it called? The Community Parks and Rec District, whatever it is, being, you know, sort of this hybrid that does represent community interest in ways that so many other state apparatuses don't. John, I apologize. I know you're facilitating. I just wanted to say for Summer and Liz and Amanda, that you are actually talking to Noah, not just a shadow. The problem is we have a lighting issue in here. Oh, we have Ash Valenti wanting to join. Can we let Ash in?
Mhm.
All right. Okay. Liz, are you good? Did we want to move to Summer?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah, very sorry for the lighting in here.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off. Get the good zoom and so forth.
Yeah. Welcome, Ash.
And welcome to Ash.
Maybe if I turn off that screen, the light will be better.
It might be worse.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Never mind.
I don't know if like mess around. Oh, wait, that's a little better.
Did it go
I
out?
think it's an
Better.
that is better. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. All right.
That's
Okay.
Hi, Ash. For joining.
Okay, so I guess I'm up next, so I'll go ahead and ask a question. Noah, first of all, I want to say that I really enjoyed reading your thesis. I thought it was wonderful and I learned a lot. And I also really appreciate the work that you're putting into the actual case. And so that's what I'm going to ask questions about, is your involvement in thinking about methodology. But I just want to like state out front that I really enjoyed reading it, and I feel that it's actually has a lot of potential and can, like, I think of it as path breaking in what you're trying to do and the things that you're bringing together. And it's really impressive to see how your ideas are coming together at this early stage in your career. So something we were discussing was how difficult of a case IV food forest really is. And so I think when we have difficult cases, what we really require innovative methodologies or just like creative ways to think through how do we study these difficult and contentious and emerging spaces that kind of evade traditional modes of study. And I think that's what you're up against. And I think that you've managed that really gracefully. And I think there's still a lot of room and potential to explore how you might do more work like this in the future. And one of the things I noted from your presentation and just how you kind of frame your thesis is that you reference cities as assemblages. And I'm thinking about how food forests are also assemblages. And so how might food forests as assemblages be understood using some of the creative, innovative methodologies that we might look at when we talk about assemblages. And so one thing that really struck me was, your methods, and I really appreciate that you're trying to bring all of these things together. And I know how difficult that can be. And instead of, kind of committing to one, I think you wanted to kind of weave them together. And I always appreciate the hard work that goes into doing that kind of innovative methodological process. And I'm wondering, if maybe you need to expand that a bit more and think about how, as a you call yourself a participant observer. Like in my reading of your work, I think you actually go beyond that. I think that you're more than just a participant. I think that you're so intimately involved, ideologically, physically, bodily involved in this process that you might expand how you think about your role in the case, and really maybe perhaps embrace the autoethnography methodological perspective as a way to kind of center and really focus what you did and how you're analyzing your experience. And so I think my comment is that your approach really does go beyond these traditional ethnographic case study methods, and maybe that's where your work is feeling a little stuck, is that you want to call it a case study, everything all at once. But I think you're actually doing something that's like pushing the boundaries across all of those. And so my suggestion would be to encourage you to really embrace the uniqueness of the emergence and the assemblage of these food forests, and to, you know, use what you already are doing to embrace a more innovative and creative methodological framing for your work. And so one idea that came to mind when I was reading your thesis was, you know, maybe what you're doing is more of a multi-species autoethnography of urban forest assembly. And so that's a fancy string of words. But I was trying to kind of figure out, like, you know, you're doing something special and unique here. And I think you could give yourself more credit for really breaking a new path methodologically, because I think more people are going to want to figure out, how do we study these kinds of contentious and tricky places. And so that leads to my question. And so my question for you is, what tensions do you think exist in shifting lenses between these different methodological perspectives, between multi-species ethnography, participatory action research, and autoethnography? And, you know, do you see those tensions in your own thought process in your work? And what would it mean to embrace one over the other? And now that you're at the end of writing this thesis, do you feel that one is calling you more than the other as you think about your next steps?
Thank you, Summer. Yeah, that is very good to hear, actually, because I think whenever we're trying to do something innovative, it's also like, you still have to be careful not to think that I am reinventing the wheel, right? There's a lot of people doing things that are similar in one way or another, and then trying to like be in dialogue with them and work with them and do something that is not totally different and detached. But at the same time, it's nice to know that it does go a little bit beyond what has been done, because I think that is something that really motivates me, you know, this curiosity of like, what else can we do that is new and yeah, creative, and looking at it in a different way. And I have come from a path of what I studied in my previous MA was very related to like questioning the epistemological grounds of the way we start thinking in the first place, and working with this critique of the very idea of a method as something that can even happen, you know, like have this like pre-designed path that you're just going to follow, and actually not taking into account that the field is alive and full of surprises and absurd and non-linear events that will happen and will reshape and re-signify what we arrived with. So I think that is in one way, and this is kind of an evasive, easy answer, but I think it's true. There is no answer that will be completely satisfactory. Like, now I'm going to use this one method and this is going to solve all my methodological problems. I think that there is always a little bit of playing around and experimenting and using these different tools that are available. But I think that in this case in particular, I was actually, when trying to situate myself among all the options, it felt like there are many options that I am doing something similar to. So I did try to describe the research as all of them, and maybe that is too much. I think that moving forward, also because of what I plan to study, I expect it to be less of an autoethnography, because I won't be as involved, or I will be involved, but in a very different way. So I'm talking about this MST settlement. They have been doing it for decades, and I'm going to be there to see what they are doing. And even if I want and hope to learn in the process and be a part and contribute to the process, it is still a very different position in the field to be. And I want to go more in the direction of multi-species ethnography in that case. So less of an autoethnography. And also, I don't know to what extent it will be an action research, but still I feel like it's someone else's action more than my own, for all reasons, for the context and the history of the group that is undertaking that experiment. So even if I'm able to help a little bit here and there, it's their action. So basically, by eliminating options, I think that it gets more narrow. And I think that the multi-species ethnography is one of the most fresh, emergent, still open to innovation, maybe, of these different approaches. So I think that still leaves enough ground to be creative and experimental in how that's gonna be designed and executed. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Summer. Oh, what's up?
Yeah,
Oh.
no, and then final thought about, so the tensions that arise, one of the tensions I remember having conversations with John about it like a year and a half ago, that is the fact of me being from a specific species as a part of my positionality. And then if I want to, for example, do interviews with humans, I'm being anthropocentric because I can't interview a plant or a butterfly in the same way, but at the same time, recognizing that this is who I am and what I am right now. So it has to be an autoethnography in some way if I'm doing a multi-species ethnography, because it is about also how I am reflecting about myself as a part of that relationship. And maybe to some extent, an ethnography is always an autoethnography, right? Like, you know, more explicit or less explicit way. But I think that it's particularly interesting when we're trying to do this epistemological expansion towards other species while still coming from this specific form of existence. That's an unsolvable tension, probably.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Noah, and thanks for a great question, Summer. Very generative. Obviously, let's turn to Kevin then. If you're done, Summer, is that good? Then turning to Kevin.
First I want to say that I spent most of my life on the East Coast and the Midwest, so you know the intellectual culture I was part of, if someone said pretty good, that's the California equivalent of that's like really, really excellent and dynamic. So excuse me, and I still haven't fully acculturated, but I think it's quite good. But I do have a couple issues I want to raise. Let me go to the one that was supposed to be second, but because Liz also raised it, I wanted to say that too, that, you know, what does it mean to say self-generating? Because theoretically, if you want to say multi-species, not only ethnography, but multi-species life and interaction. I mean, I don't think, you know, humans are maybe like the grandparents or parents, you know, that, what do they call it? The wagon train when they arrive at the college now, and they want to stay when they're dropping off the kid. But in other words, why not some kind of continuing relationship of humans to this, whether it takes a more state-centered form, which I don't think we have to think of as the state in the strong sense, because there are functions of the state, like interacting with nature of this sort, that would exist in a non-state society as well. And I just finished editing this thing by Karl Marx. We figured out he was saying Staatsfunktionen and not Staat. So anyway, and then also, you know, there's this distinction that our culture makes between play and work, which is not without validity, but in other words, maintaining the garden, but also the garden there, I guess, slipped in, the food forest, because the whole food forest, I mean, I didn't know what a food forest was till I read this. So not simply to help maintain it, but to interact with it in a way that's enjoyable on both sides. The enjoyment and the pleasure of that, I think, is something that needs to be thought about, because I guess kind of got stuck a little on that phrase. This forest will become eventually self-generating. So I think that's something that's already been addressed, and I think it even, you know, it needs to be thought about more. And I'm partially just repeating what was already said. So that's my first point.
Thank you. Do you want me to comment? Do you want to
If,
comment?
if you have anything further to say, but if you don't, if you've already said it, I can just go on in the second.
No, I like the way you put it with the idea that it can be done also as a way that is pleasurable and enjoyable, and not in a sense of work as sacrifice, right? But a work that is actually fulfilling and rewarding in itself. But that is hard in the current circumstances where people work full time and are exhausted and depressed and so on. So I think that, yeah, utopia wise, which I really like to go in that direction. I think that's the way to think about it. What we would be going for is tending to the food forest as a pleasurable work, regardless of it being paid or not paid.
Well, I mean, I was even thinking of, I mean, I'm not part of the project, obviously, but why can't there be a couple chairs there so human beings could just sit out there?
There are.
So just going and sitting there
Hmm.
is interacting with it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I'm also talking about. So not simply tending it,
Mm,
but just being there.
mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, and then I had this just, I don't think it was addressed, and I was just curious, do you use fertilizers? It's like a really empirical point.
Yeah, it should be addressed. We use, yeah, organic natural fertilizers and these mycelium powerful boosts and things, and we have something that started happening that I really like is that we're receiving compost from the Isla Vista Compost Collective. So they are composting food scraps from the neighborhood, and
That's
then
great.
we receive them for the food forest in the same neighborhood.
That's great.
We don't use any chemical fertilizers, although the soil itself is still probably toxic to some extent.
Yeah. Okay, so my second issue is when you, I mean, you talk in several places, but the main place you talk about is on page 7. You get into stuff about the city, kind of this, almost the city is parasitical.
Mhm.
And I think I have trouble with that unless you want to say urban areas in a very broad sense, or commodified areas, because, you know, we're in California, so that the areas of the state that are outside the cities are like just some of the most ecologically destructive. I mean, you go along Route 5 and it's 100 miles, whatever it is,
Oh, yeah.
of orange trees just there. So intensely commodified, I'm just looking for a different word here than just the city. And I'm not saying for the thesis, but you know, think on this in the future. Let me see. So that's one issue. The other thing is actually, I mean, you did talk about it today. I don't, maybe I didn't notice it as much when I read the thing, but about the sustainable, not just the sustainable city, but the city where you have plants and forests within the city. So, because it's really the suburban development that's the most destructive, isn't it? I mean, when people concentrate in cities, that's when public transportation becomes possible, for example. And my ecological utopia is not spending all my time sitting in a food forest in Santa Barbara. I want to get on a high-speed train, and I want to go across the country. I want to travel even beyond it. And so anyway, just I just wanted to mention some of those kinds of issues that, you know, are more, maybe in future projects, a more sophisticated theorization, not in the sense of changing the basic framework that you have, but maybe putting it more in dialogue with some other issues and perspectives.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that is one of the constant, what's the word, traps of like falling again into the binaries that I and others are also trying to criticize, and then it goes again. And then while you were talking, it reminded me of, I thought of bringing in, but then it was, too much, but the discussion that Donna Haraway does about the technological, the cyborg thing, and the technological as not being opposed to the natural. And I think that would be interesting, and it goes in both directions. I think one is not rejecting the technological in our sense, like the high-speed trains and all that, but seeing how that can be integrated, and at the same time looking at a food forest as also a form of technology that is not working through machines and robots, but that is still somehow mediated by these human tools and knowledge that is at play, and maybe multi-species technology, I don't know, just crossed my mind. But I think that in terms of, what we want cities to look like, I think that when we think of a city that is densely populated as sustainable, then we're still thinking with the binary that we want people to be all condensed in one place so that outside so-called nature may be preserved. And I think that what the tradition and the practice of food forest points to is rather that humans can be spread all over as long as we are engaging with that natural world in a different way. And that would be true for both the countryside and the forest and the city. So changing the way in which we relate with the land and food production as being a central way to do that.
So you're thinking of a de-urbanization possibly.
Or a different urbanization, or a
Yeah, because I mean, right now the world's population is concentrated in these gigantic cities. The cities are growing more and more. So I thought it was very fruitful that slide you had where you showed the plants growing inside of the city. And of course, some of it's an old idea of having like parks in the city, but some small aspects of it. But because if we're spread out, there's that question of transport, unless we're going to only be within walking distance of everything that we do, or bicycling distance.
Yeah, these are good questions. I feel like they're definitely beyond my expertise or knowledge at this point. What can actually be done and integrated in terms of nature that will make that kind of technology sustainable, in the very specific sense of sustainable, I guess, being like it is not maybe generating any ecological benefit, but it is balanced out so that we can still have a train and it not being destructive, or if it is destructive in some extent and something else we are doing is counteracting that. I don't know. I hope it's possible. We need it to be.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin and Summer. And Liz, and we're going to turn to David now.
All right. Really enjoying the conversation. And I also just want to, I think, Liz and Summer might have said this earlier, I think, and Kevin did it in his own East Coast, Midwest way, that I really did enjoy the thesis, and really glad to hear also the comments about the methods. I think that Summer was drawing out that, you really are doing something innovative here, and I agree that you shouldn't sell yourself short. And I think there's a real gem of something you can really tease out there. I really appreciated the point that you were making after the conversation with John about this being this being inherently sort of multi-species because you as a human. And of course I might add, I think Summer said that forests are assemblages as well as cities, but humans are assemblages as well. We are multi-species beings. Speaking of which, I didn't mean to do this, but it's perfect. On page 28, you write about not having knowledge of how to plant food and how to feed yourself made you feel, as you wrote, less human. And my comment there was, wow, this is a really great point. But, to Kevin's point, it's a reality that defines a huge percentage of human beings today, because now, as we know, where most of us are in urban areas. So what does it mean for our species in the 21st century when most of us live in cities? And I think it's safe to say most of us don't know how to plant and feed ourselves. Does that mean that what it means to be human has changed?
Mhm.
And if, and however you answer that, I think then goes back to the question of species and your positionality and multi-species work. So,
Mhm.
and I'm also thinking about that question because I think she's a geographer, that Catherine Youssef, I think, describes herself as a professor of inhumanities. And she's saying, basically the idea of the human, and others can correct me, for her, and well, all of us in this Western cultural context, comes out of sort of a Greco-Roman and then later an Enlightenment, perspective that sees humans as this singular sort of dominant being and category, and of course with all of its attendant racial and gendered and classed, overtones. And so her point is, well, if that's what a human is, I want nothing to do with that. Right? Let's redefine what it means to be human. And I think you're very implicitly, if not explicitly, doing that here. And so anyway, wonder what you thought about that.
Mhm. Thank you, David.
Mhm.
I really like this question and this discussion. Reminds me first of the title of this short essay by, I don't remember who, that is called "Human Nature is More Than Human Nature." So yeah, I think that does already summarize the point that whatever we are doing, we are in the world and we are an assemblage and we are among assemblages and we're interacting in one way or another. I think it's maybe related to what I was trying to say about the way cities and technology are structured, that it's about how, if we are engaging in these assemblages in a way that is destructive to others or in a way that is generating benefits to others around us. So maybe it's not necessarily about knowing how to plant or not, but about feeling that I maybe don't know much about how to care for other species and how to help the place that is allowing me to be alive, right? Like how do they say it? Sustain what sustains me. And I do need to know that to stay alive, unless someone else knows how to do that and is doing that. And I think that maybe is the problem, that less and less people know how to do that, and these cultures are being like destroyed and effaced slowly, and traditional peasant knowledge is in decline, and we see all the effects of that. So how do we reconnect with that? And it also reminded me of this Brazilian agroecologist who talks about humans, and he says there are 5 species in nature that can be called ultra-social, because they are the only species in which a small group is responsible for feeding the whole society. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and that can definitely like open more paths for thought. But basically, then yes, maybe not every single individual needs to know how to plant in order to be a human, but we need to have a well-formed, sustainable society in which enough of the humans in there can take care of a sustainable or regenerative way to produce food for all the society. And I guess it makes me feel less human because the society where I participate is not doing that, and I don't know how to do that. And the learning how to contribute to repairing that makes me feel more human, not only as an individual, but in the society that needs that done.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
This has been a very rich conversation, and I want to thank all the colleagues and Noah in particular for that. And I also want to begin with praising the way in which you have developed this project, Noah, from the very beginning, and making it as concretely, empirically grounded as you have here. given the complexity of the theories that you're working with. And I'm glad that the word came up in our conversation a couple times of utopia. And I'm wondering how you would put into relationship the concept of utopia and the reality of the food forest. And of course, that works both ways. In what ways is a food forest can be thought of as a utopian project of some kind, and in what ways does thinking about a food forest as a systemic alternative reflect and tell us something about utopias in the present day? So it's a kind of open-ended question about your thoughts about all of that, and maybe in that way, a kind of way to bring the conversation full circle into some sort of provisional conclusion.
Thank you, John. Yeah, that is a nice way to circle back to utopia, which was the mental landscape from where I started this project, really searching for what is the coolest thing happening, what is the best thing we are doing around to solve our problems and create a new form of society. And that's how I ended up at the food forest and realizing like, oh, this is it. This is a great thing that we're doing to move towards utopia. So yeah, in the sense of the ways that I've been engaging with the idea of utopia, the food forest is definitely a utopian practice. So it is, it comes from this ideal that we have in a horizon of what we want. We want this sustainable city with food forests in every block that people can go and collect food and be with their neighbors and share knowledge and share time and enjoy and have fun and so on. And then the project takes place based on that vision. I think I'm not speaking only to myself here. I think that does reflect like what all the founders of the food forest and also current people that engage with it. It is still trying to build this more just world that resembles our ideal or our current best version we can imagine. So the food forest would be a utopian practice or a utopian experience in that sense, moving us in that direction. And then it also, and the second part of how I ended up with the food forest was trying to think of an ecological utopia that isn't concerned only with humans, as was the history of most utopias, basically. And all the big utopias, they hardly look at other species or even agriculture, and the ways that food production is done is not so much a part of these utopias, or if it is, then it's not really questioning the way that it's done. And then the food forest is doing that. It's a utopia that is also dreaming of monarch butterflies being back full power and all different thousands of species and waters and all these different sorts of existences being able to thrive in there and benefiting from the general society, the general system that is connecting everyone together. That is why I became infatuated with the food forest as a practice and as an object of study. It is because I think it is very utopian in these different senses. And finally, the last thing I think is it's beautiful and very related is that when I just started to investigate and what is agroecology, if this is what is happening here, and that was a new topic for me, and I was talking to many people, and the idea of utopia appeared in people's discourse about it without me bringing it up even, because they said like, yes, there is no one final formula that is actually happening, and that is agroecology. It's more this direction that we want to go towards. We want every relationship to be just in the whole chain, from land to water to farmer to female farmer to consumer to waste and so on. We want everything to be fair. And of course, that is not a fulfilled reality, probably hardly anywhere, but it is still what we are going for. And so other people also described agroecology as a kind of utopia that is also taking place in the real world. So,
A real utopia, perhaps, as Eric Wright put it.
Mhm.
This is what we're looking
For
for.
which he means the public library. It's very.
Um, Great. I think that brings us indeed full circle, and I want to thank Noah and thank the colleagues for the conversation. And this is the point, Noah, which we ask you again to step outside, and we'll have a conversation and get back, bring you back in after that.
okay, thank you all very much.
Lovely, thank you.
Will you, call me?
Yes, and our guests have to go into a waiting room for this.
Right. Oh, Amanda and Ash will, you don't mind? Oh, I think Ash just dropped out. We'll put you in a waiting room again, if that's okay.
Is it just a formality afterwards? I might just hop off.
Oh, yeah.
now.
Yeah, it's a total formality. Well, I wouldn't be presumptuous that she's gonna pass, but you can feel free to, so.
Okay, I'll check in with her later. But if my vote counts,
What's your vote?
my vote definitely a pass.
Okay, one pass. We'll see if we can build on that. No.
Okay.
I
Thank you
think-
all. Really
all-
enjoyed participating. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, Amanda. Oh, and I will actually pause the recording as well. Okay,
So Noah, thank you for the conversation, which we all agreed was extraordinary. And what we would like to do based on the conversation and the document is to give you a high pass for this piece of work. And so congratulations on becoming a master's of sociology again in this setting. And you'll be getting feedback from everyone, I think, on what to do, next steps, and where you could take this, because there's lots of ways that this could become 1 or 2 scholarly articles, perhaps, and encouragement about presenting it further. We know you presented some of this, but think about maybe sociological venues as well that you could take this into, because this is work that needs to be, you know, pushing boundaries in sociology and even in environmental sociology. So we want to congratulate you all around on what happened here today.
congratulations, Master Cykman.
All right. So that concludes the event.
Yeah.
And,
That's done.
oh, there's some signatures.
Oh, signatures, yeah.
To be done. The 3 of us in the room should sign what we have here, and I know that Erica will be in touch with Summer and Liz for electronic signatures. That might suffice. So that's how it's mostly done nowadays, I think, in sociology.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us, and here we are. It's a happy occasion. No, we look forward to much more, and hope you'll celebrate this thoroughly in the moment.
Thank you for being here, for celebrating with me, for the very meaningful feedback.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
All right,
I am so shady here.
you're a shady person. We knew that coming in. So Summer and Liz will get like the DocuSign electronically.
Oh, the chair has to sign this. I sign for the chair.
Okay,
Oh, I think department chair, that will be added. Okay.
Okay.
And here are the signature papers, or we just sign here.
okay. So I think these guys are.
Yeah.
probably done. Okay,
We can say goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us. Hope we'll have many more conversations together.
thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
thank you. Bye-bye.